Hey guys, tonight we dive into the restless gaslit nights of Victorian London, where the city never quite lets you drift off to sleep. Picture yourself trudging through foggy cobblestone streets, under flickering gas lamps, the air thick with soot, horse hooves clattering, and the distant hum of factory whistles. You probably won't survive this night without a nap, let alone a good sleep. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious to see who's joining from where. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the Victorian era, nighttime in London was anything but quiet. Unlike the serene images of sleeping cities, we might imagine the streets buzzed with activity. The clatter of horse-drawn carriages, the chatter of night vendors, and the echoing footsteps of late-shift workers created a constant soundscape. Even inside homes, the creaks of wooden floors and distant city noises made falling asleep tricky. Gas lamps flickered with inconsistent light, sometimes leaking warmth or unsettling shadows, unsettling the senses just as you tried to relax. Unlike today's cozy, insulated bedrooms, many Victorian homes were drafty and poorly insulated, leaving sleepers vulnerable to cold or dampness, which could trigger restless nights. Historians still argue whether the Industrial Revolution worsened sleep deprivation or simply exposed it more clearly. It's clear, though, that urbanization brought new challenges for rest, as crowds, noise, and pollution invaded personal spaces. In cramped tenements, families often shared rooms, and privacy was a rare luxury. Imagine trying to rest while a coughing sibling or noisy neighbor keeps you awake. The lack of proper sanitation and ventilation often meant uncomfortable, unhealthy sleeping conditions that could cause or worsen insomnia. Victorians often turned to rituals to fight off sleeplessness. These could include calming herbal teas or carefully arranged bedroom furniture believed to promote peace. It's fascinating that some of these practices echo modern advice on sleep hygiene, even if the science wasn't fully understood then. For example, chamomile and valerian teas were popular for their sedative qualities, although how effective they truly were is up for debate. Interestingly, some remedies also involve patent medicines, commercially sold concoctions that promised restful sleep, but often contained opiates like laudanum. These were widely used but came with risks of addiction and side effects. This raises the question, were Victorian sleep aids helpful or harmful? The answer is complicated, reflecting the era's evolving understanding of health and medicine. As you start to feel your eyelids grow heavy, the cacophony of that Victorian night fades, replaced by a gentle hush. Sleep may have been elusive then, but tonight let the story itself lull you closer to rest. You're still settling into that foggy Victorian night, but now let's pull back the curtain a bit and peek into the common causes behind all that tossing and turning. Sleep wasn't simply elusive because of noisy streets or drafty rooms. A tangled web of factors made insomnia a frequent visitor in Victorian bedrooms. First off, overcrowding played a huge role. Imagine living in a tiny, cramped tenement, sometimes with entire families sharing a single room. It's hard enough to find peace when you have privacy, let alone when your bed is inches away from someone snoring or coughing. Add to that the poor sanitation and sometimes downright filthy conditions, and you have a recipe for restless nights. Rats scurrying, the smell of coal smoke and waste drifting through thin walls, hardly the stuff of sweet dreams. You might be surprised to learn that diet also factored into Victorian sleeplessness. Heavy meals rich in meat, gravy, and starches, especially eaten late in the evening, could disrupt digestion and lead to discomfort at night. The concept of late-night snacks was around, but the timing and content of those meals were quite different from what we might recommend today. Plus, tea and coffee were staples, with caffeine sneaking in long after sunset, keeping many wired. Stress and mental health also deserve a mention. The rapid pace of urbanization, economic pressures, and social upheaval made the Victorian era a time of intense anxiety for many. Conditions like nervous disorders or neurasthenia were frequently diagnosed, often linked to insomnia and fatigue. Women in particular were believed to be more susceptible, with doctors prescribing everything from rest cures to sedatives. Here you find the roots of modern conversations around sleep and mental wellness. Historians still debate how much Victorian insomnia was physical versus psychological. Was it the environment and lifestyle, or deeper mental health issues, or both? Likely a complicated blend. Quirky enough, some Victorians believed that certain activities before bed could either use up or conserve nervous energy. Reading by gaslight was sometimes discouraged because it might overstimulate the mind, while gentle handwork or light music was thought to calm nerves. This might remind you of today's screen time debates, just with candles and lamps instead of smartphones. You settle further into this era's nighttime mood, feeling the heavy fog of challenges that made sleep elusive, but also the human creativity and hope woven into the rituals people tried to find rest. The Victorian night stretches on, and you're now drawn into the rituals and habits people developed to fight the persistent grip of sleeplessness. Imagine a time when science was still uncovering the secrets of sleep, and much of what soothed restless minds came from tradition, trial, and a touch of superstition. Before bed, many Victorians engaged in a set of calming routines designed to ease the transition from wakefulness to sleep. These could range from simple hand washing and changing into night clothes to more elaborate practices, like reading poetry or sipping on herbal teas. The ritual itself became a signal to the body and mind that the day was done and rest was due. The idea that a consistent bedtime routine helps sleep isn't new. It's one of those enduring truths through centuries. A common practice was the use of nightcaps, not the kind you wear, but small doses of alcoholic spirits meant to relax the nerves. These were popular especially among the middle and upper classes, but could easily backfire if overused, leading to disrupted sleep cycles. It's a bit like today's wine before bed debate. It might help you fall asleep faster, but doesn't guarantee a restful night. There were also superstitions at play. For instance, placing certain herbs like lavender or rosemary under pillows was thought to ward off nightmares and invite peaceful sleep. This blend of herbalism and folklore created a comforting atmosphere, even if its effectiveness was subjective. It's fascinating how scent and environment were recognized as powerful influences on the sleep experience, a concept modern sleep science now supports. Historians still debate how much these rituals were genuinely believed to work versus serving as psychological comforts. Were they placebo or potent? Likely a little of both, and that's part of the charm. One quirky detail: some Victorians believed that sleeping with a window open helped air out night spirits or bad dreams, while others thought it invited cold illnesses. This tug-of-war between health and superstition echoes the ongoing human quest to control the unknown. As you picture yourself winding down with these calming habits, you might feel a subtle sense of kinship with those long-ago sleepers, all striving for that elusive good night. The rituals weren't perfect, but they were attempts to reclaim peaceful rest amid the bustle and uncertainties of Victorian life. You're nestled deeper into Victorian nights now, and the aroma of herbs and teas wafts gently through the story. Herbal remedies were a cornerstone of Victorian sleep aids, and it's easy to see why. When scientific medicine was still finding its feet, nature offered a comforting, accessible way to chase away insomnia. Chamomile tea, for example, was a go-to for calming nerves. The mild, apple-like scent of dried chamomile flowers steeping in hot water was a familiar bedtime companion in many households. People believed its gentle sedative properties could soothe the mind and invite rest. Imagine a quiet kitchen in a Victorian home, the soft clink of a teacup, the warm amber glow of tea, and the comforting knowledge that this simple brew might ease your restless thoughts. Valerian root was another popular choice. Its strong, earthy aroma wasn't exactly everyone's favorite, but it was prized for its calming effects. Victorian pharmacies stocked valerian in various forms, from tinctures to powders promising relief for anxious souls. Some even thought valerian could help with nightmares, lending an extra layer of psychological comfort. Quirky enough, lavender wasn't just for perfumes and sachets. It was often included in bedtime teas or pillows. Its scent was thought to repel evil spirits and promote tranquility. Today, lavender aromatherapy is still used for relaxation, showing how some traditions endure through centuries. Historians still debate just how effective these herbal remedies were. Some argue that the placebo effect combined with the soothing ritual of drinking warm tea did most of the work. Others believe the mild pharmacological effects genuinely helped. Either way, these plants became allies in the Victorian quest for sleep. But herbal remedies weren't always enough, and sometimes they were combined with patent medicines, over-the-counter potions, often containing opium or other narcotics. These miracle cures promised quick relief but could lead to dependency and other serious issues, highlighting the fine line Victorians walked between comfort and danger. As you sip your imaginary chamomile, you might smile at the thought that even in an era so far removed, some comforts and struggles of sleeplessness remain timeless. The nighttime hush of Victorian London was often broken not only by restless sleepers, but also by the silent shadow of patent medicines and laudanum, the era's quick fix for insomnia, and a whole lot more. As you imagine yourself in a dimly lit apothecary shop, the shelves lined with mysterious bottles promising sleep. In a drop or two, you step into the world of one of the most popular yet perilous Victorian remedies. Laudanum, a tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol, was everywhere, prescribed by doctors, handed out by pharmacists, and used widely by people desperate for relief from insomnia, pain, or anxiety. Unlike today's strict regulations, Victorian society viewed laudanum with a mixture of respect and casual acceptance. It was as common in many households as a cup of tea and just as addictive. You might find it surprising that even famous writers and artists, including Charles Dickens and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, were known to use laudanum, sometimes to tragic effect. Its use in literature often reflected its dark duality, a balm for creativity and pain, but a slippery slope toward dependency. Historians still argue about how widespread laudanum addiction was and how much Victorian society understood its dangers. Some viewed it as a necessary evil, a tool to survive harsh realities. Others saw it as a creeping epidemic masked by social norms. Quirky enough, laudanum was sometimes sold with sweet flavorings or disguised in syrups to make it more palatable, especially for children, which only increased risks. The combination of opium's power and easy access made it a double-edged sword, relief with a hidden cost. Alongside laudanum, many patent medicines touted exotic ingredients and secret formulas, often with little scientific basis. They promised everything from better sleep to renewed vigor. The lack of regulation allowed companies to advertise boldly, leading to widespread use and often disappointment or harm. You can imagine the desperation behind these choices, sleepless nights, anxiety, and a society grappling with the limits of its medical knowledge. It's a stark reminder that even in the search for rest, the solutions can sometimes bring their own restless consequences. As you settle deeper into your imagined Victorian bedroom, you might be thankful that while insomnia remains, at least today's remedies come with clearer warnings and fewer sweetened opium syrups. The room you imagine yourself in now is a Victorian bedroom, a place where sleep was supposed to happen but didn't always cooperate. Victorian bedrooms were a curious mix of comfort, superstition, and social signals, each element playing a subtle role in whether you drift off or stare at the ceiling all night. First, consider the typical bedroom of a middle-class Victorian family. It might have heavy drapes, ornate furniture, and a massive four-poster bed draped with thick curtains designed to keep out drafts. These curtains weren't just decorative, they created a cozy microclimate around the sleeper, which was important since central heating was non-existent. You might picture the feel of velvet or heavy brocade against your skin, muffling sounds and offering a cocoon-like privacy. Yet this very enclosure sometimes made the room stuffy, ironically worsening sleep quality. Contrast that with the cramped, often poorly ventilated rooms of working-class families where multiple people shared a bed or small chamber. Privacy was scarce, and the cacophony of sounds, snoring, coughing children, crying was a nightly companion. Sometimes the bedroom doubled as a workspace or storage area, cluttered with tools or goods, further complicating the environment's suitability for rest. Lighting was another challenge. Gas lamps flickered unpredictably, casting uneasy shadows that could disrupt your brain's ability to relax. Imagine trying to settle down while the light hums and sputters, a constant reminder that the night was far from silent or dark. Historians still debate the extent to which the physical sleep environment influenced Victorian insomnia versus psychological or social causes. Some argue that the bedroom setup was a significant factor, while others point to the overwhelming social stresses of the era. A quirky detail: some Victorians believed that a tidy room brought better sleep, leading to elaborate cleaning rituals before bed, while others thought certain furniture arrangements could keep evil spirits at bay, reminders of how superstition intertwined with practical concerns. You might catch yourself glancing at your own bedroom now, appreciating its quiet, steady hum and adjustable lights as you drift closer to rest. Victorian sleep environments were far from perfect, but within their constraints, people still sought the sanctuary of peaceful sleep. By now, you're familiar with the creaking beds and herbal teas of Victorian nights, but let's turn our gaze to what the doctors of the era thought they were dealing with. Spoiler alert, the science of sleep in Victorian medicine was ambitious. You might want to lie back for this one, because some of their theories were as dreamy and bewildering as the sleep they hoped to explain. Victorian physicians didn't have brain scans or sleep studies. What they had were observations, patient diaries, and a healthy dose of guesswork. Sleep, they believed, was a kind of nervous withdrawal, a state where the brain rested by shutting off sensory contact with the world. Some doctors thought it was the soul temporarily detaching from the body. Just a little casual existentialism before bed. A mainstream fact: Victorian neurologist Sir William Gowers theorized that sleeplessness was often due to nervous excitement, a term that lumped together everything from anxiety to indigestion. You couldn't really argue with it because no one quite knew what it meant. And while today we talk about REM cycles and circadian rhythms, Victorians had little concept of sleep stages. They did, however, suspect that digestion, liver function, and even poor posture could prevent restful sleep. One physician even claimed that leaning slightly left during rest allowed for better bile flow. Sound medical advice. Historians still argue whether this theory was harmless nonsense or proto-sleep science. Quirky? Absolutely. Some doctors recommended wrapping one's head in warm flannel to trap brain heat, which they believed encouraged drowsiness. Others insisted that soaking your feet in mustard water could draw excess blood away from the head and into the extremities, calming the brain. It's not exactly melatonin gummies, but you can admire the creativity. Mental health was another frontier. Insomnia was often seen as a symptom of moral or emotional failure. Women who couldn't sleep were diagnosed with hysteria, while men might be told they suffered from brain fatigue, a condition assumed to come from overwork or intellectual strain. Rest, cures, and isolation were common prescriptions, particularly for women, sometimes doing more harm than good. You imagine visiting a Victorian doctor for insomnia. You might be told to avoid strong emotions, cold air, and excitable novels. Yes, your evening reading choices could be seen as hazardous to your slumber. The wrong book, they warned, might wake the mind and unsettle the nerves. Despite these oddities, some Victorian doctors did emphasize the importance of a calm, consistent nighttime routine, limited stimulation, and herbal support, all ideas that still hold water today. But they were swimming blind in a sea of theories, hopeful that somewhere among mustard foot baths and nervous tonics, sleep would finally arrive. As the room around you dims a little more and your breath slows with the rhythm of the story, you can appreciate that the Victorian struggle for sleep was in many ways not so different from your own. Different tools, same dream. The night thickens, and now you find yourself not in a home or apothecary, but in a clinic, a spa, or perhaps even a sanatorium, because when the gentle remedies failed, Victorians had a whole other arsenal to throw at sleeplessness. Welcome to the world of sleep cures, where your doctor might prescribe you total darkness, a firm mattress, or 6 weeks of doing absolutely nothing. Yes, really. The most famous of these was the rest cure pioneered by Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell. If you were a Victorian woman suffering from insomnia, anxiety, or what they broadly called nervous conditions, you might be subjected to this method. It involved weeks or even months of enforced bed rest isolation, a high-fat diet, and no reading, writing, or even conversation. Because, of course, nothing says relax like being forbidden to talk or move. Historians still argue whether the rest cure was a well-meaning psychological treatment or a form of social control, particularly for women. It famously inspired Charlotte Perkins Gilman's short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, in which the cure becomes more of a slow descent into madness. So yeah, not exactly the ideal bedtime story. More benign were hydrotherapy spas. These were part wellness retreat, part medical center. You'd soak in warm baths, alternate with cold ones, maybe even get wrapped in wet sheets. The idea was to shock the nervous system back into balance, which sounds a lot more intense than today's bath bombs and Epsom salt soaks. Still, some people swore by it. Warm water, soft lighting, and structured quiet, it had potential, even if the science was more splash than substance. One quirky treatment, electric sleep helmets. No joke. These devices, sometimes made with coils or metal bands, were worn around the head and promised to regulate the mind's energy waves. Victorian inventors loved harnessing the power of new tech, and electricity was all the rage. Why not zap your brain into dreamland? Results were unsurprisingly mixed. Light therapy also made its debut here. Doctors noticed that some people slept better after exposure to natural sunlight during the day. Patients were encouraged to spend time outdoors, to walk, and to absorb good air as a treatment for both depression and insomnia. Even then, people knew that a bit of sunlight on your face could change the course of a day and a night. Mainstream fact. By the late 1800s, sleep clinics started appearing in Europe, where patients were studied under controlled conditions. Dimmed rooms, monitored meals, enforced quiet. These were the predecessors of modern sleep laboratories. They didn't have EEGs, but the idea was the same: watch, learn, and maybe, just maybe, fix the problem. What's telling is how often these treatments came with rituals, soaks, massages, walks at prescribed times, silence after sunset. The rhythm itself was part of the cure. And maybe that's the biggest Victorian insight we still carry. Sleep needs a ceremony, a certain slowness, a surrender. So you tuck yourself in under an imagined blanket of quiet routine and soft electric hums, floating between a mustard bath and a wool-lined sleep helmet, amused but oddly comforted by how inventive, even hopeful people have always been when trying to chase the stillness of sleep. You're gliding further into the shadows of the Victorian night now, and just when you thought things couldn't get more peculiar, they do. Because this is the point in the journey when sleep gets theatrical, literally. Welcome to the dreamlike realm of hypnotists, mesmerists, and the oddly popular phenomenon of public sleep performances. Yes, Victorians paid money, actual shillings, to sit in stuffy parlors and crowded theaters watching other people sleep, sort of. What they were really watching was the mysterious art of mesmerism, a precursor to modern hypnotism. Developed by Franz Mesmer in the late 1700s and reaching fever pitch in the 19th century, mesmerism promised to manipulate invisible energy forces to induce trance-like states and maybe even cure your insomnia. Imagine yourself sitting in a darkened Victorian parlor, warm candlelight flickering the air, smelling faintly of pipe smoke and perfume. In the center of the room, a pale man in a tight waistcoat waves his hand slowly over a volunteer's face. The subject's eyelids flutter, their breathing slows, and before you know it, they're out cold, slumped in a chair, as the mesmerist narrates their journey through sleep dreams and sometimes bizarrely past lives. Mainstream fact. James Braid, a Scottish surgeon, was among the first to treat mesmerism seriously, coining the term hypnotism in the 1840s. He believed the state was real, but purely psychological, no animal magnetism or invisible fluids involved. That shift helped nudge sleep science toward legitimacy, away from parlor trick territory. Still, historians argue whether these trances were real sleep or elaborate performances. Were participants genuinely entranced, or simply very polite Victorians playing along for social entertainment? No one knows for sure, but it made for riveting evenings and some surprisingly relaxed audiences. And there was always a fringe element. Some performers claimed they could control when a person would wake. Others offered sleep cures to the public, claiming their hypnotic touch could end years of chronic insomnia in a single session. You could pay to watch or pay to try it yourself. Often both. One quirky story, a popular mesmerist named Charles Lafontaine claimed to have hypnotized more than 75,000 people by the 1850s. His shows included making people believe they were kissed, that their hands were stuck together, or that they just enjoyed a very good nap. He insisted many left cured of ailments, sleep disorders included. Modern skepticism aside, his audiences certainly didn't fall asleep from boredom. These performances eventually influenced Victorian psychology and, indirectly, the birth of psychoanalysis. Freud himself dabbled in hypnosis before developing his infamous couch method. So yes, your sleeplessness might have had you lying in a parlor with a man swinging a watch over your face, then paying extra for the privilege. And yet, despite the spectacle, many Victorians walked away feeling calmer, lighter, or oddly better rested. Whether it was the power of suggestion, the collective hush of the audience, or just the warm tea served afterward, who's to say? You settle deeper into your mental theater seat, the lights fading, the gentle circular motions of the mesmerist's hands, lulling your thoughts into a softer rhythm. The curtain hasn't fallen on sleep quite yet, but you're getting close. The air thickens with incense now, and the creak of heavy doors gives way to murmured prayers and flickering candlelight. You've wandered into a different kind of sanctuary, one that doesn't promise a cure through tinctures or tea, but through faith. Welcome to the sacred side of Victorian sleeplessness, where religion, ritual, and the metaphysical offered solace for restless souls. For many Victorians, insomnia wasn't just a medical issue, it was a moral or spiritual one. Sleep was considered a kind of divine surrender. The Bible, after all, is full of references to sleep as peace, punishment, and even revelation. If you were lying awake at night, some might say it was because your conscience had things to say. You can almost hear the quiet scratching of a quill as a clergyman writes advice in the parish newsletter. Restless nights may signal the need for prayer. People were encouraged to keep prayer books by their beds, repeating verses softly to coax the mind into stillness. Psalm 4 and 8 was a favorite in peace. I will lie down and sleep for you alone. Lord, make me dwell in safety. Whether it was faith or repetition, doing the heavy lifting, the effect was often calming. Mainstream fact. Many churches distributed pamphlets titled Night Watches or Prayers for the Sleepless, a gentle acknowledgement that even the pious weren't immune to 3 a.m. wakefulness. Some even hosted nighttime vigils or special dawn services aimed at those who found rest elusive. Historians still argue whether these faith-based routines were a spiritual balm or a form of subtle guilt management. Did people genuinely find peace, or were they simply layering new anxiety on top of old? By worrying, they weren't faithful enough to sleep. One delightfully quirky example comes from the diaries of Victorian nuns. Some recorded waking several times per night to pray on purpose. These holy interruptions were part of their devotion, and they often described the broken sleep not as tiring but enriching. The idea that sleep was to be invaded by moments of holiness runs pretty counter to our modern obsession with uninterrupted 8-hour slumber, doesn't it? Dreams, too, held sacred weight. A vivid dream might be interpreted as divine communication or a warning. People kept dream journals, shared their visions with spiritual advisors, and consulted religious dream guides, yes, like a Victorian version of a dream dictionary, but with more brimstone. Some even believed that insomnia was God's way of making time for these night visions to occur. You picture someone in a quiet, candlelit room, kneeling beside their bed at midnight, whispering a prayer not just for sleep, but for the right kind of dream. Something meaningful, something divine. And if all else failed, there were the relics, small crosses under pillows, prayer beads held loosely in hand, or a vial of holy water nearby just in case. Because if you couldn't sleep, you could still protect your soul while you waited. So you lie back now with this slower, deeper sense of comfort. You may not be in a chapel, but the rhythm of the tale is like a hymn, steady, quiet, full of breath. Maybe that's what the Victorians were hoping for too, not just sleep, but peace. Something gentler than a sedative. Something sacred. You drift now into a quieter corridor of the Victorian night, the private, often unspoken realm of dreams and nightmares. Here, sleep was less about recovery and more about interpretation. Victorians didn't just want to have dreams, they wanted to understand them, dissect them, decode them, like telegrams from the subconscious even before the term subconscious gained popularity. You open your imaginary bedside drawer and pull out a slim cloth-bound book titled something like Dream Symbols and Their Meanings. These guides were wildly popular in the 19th century and often filled with incredibly specific interpretations. Dream of a white horse, a journey, a broken mirror, ill fortune, a ladder, social advancement unless you're falling off it, in which case get your affairs in order. One mainstream historical fact. Dream interpretation manuals were sold by traveling peddlers and found in everything from aristocratic homes to working-class tenements. Even Queen Victoria reportedly consulted dream books. They weren't considered superstition, they were bedtime tools like sleep masks or white noise machines today. Of course, not all dreams were gentle. Nightmares carried weight, cultural, psychological, and spiritual. Victorians called them night terrors or night eggs, and they were often blamed on heavy dinners, emotional excess, or, in some rather dramatic cases, the devil sitting on your chest. A charming bedtime image, right? Historians still argue whether nightmares were taken more seriously as supernatural events or psychological warnings. The truth likely lies in between. For the deeply religious, a recurring nightmare might suggest divine disapproval. For the scientifically inclined, it could signal nervous strain or bad humors. Either way, waking up gasping in the dark was enough to warrant serious attention. A quirky tidbit. Victorian dream journals sometimes included small sketches, especially if the dream was particularly vivid or recurring. One popular image was of a staircase that kept growing longer, symbolizing unresolved ambition or anxiety. You can imagine someone by candlelight, half asleep, trying to sketch the endless steps they just fled in their dreams. And then there were shared dreams. Yes, the Victorians were already fascinated by the idea that people could dream together. Some families would gather at breakfast and compare their dreams, looking for patterns or prophetic links. It was equal parts therapy and morning entertainment. Did Aunt Millicent dream of rain the same night you did? Surely a sign the crops would fail or that a visit from someone damp and disagreeable was imminent. You might chuckle now at the seriousness of it all, but there's something rather sweet about it too. In an era without smartphones or sleep trackers, your dreams were your most personal data set. You protected them, wrote them down, and tried to make sense of them in a world that didn't offer easy answers. As you relax into this slow swirl of candlelit reverie and embroidered dream symbolism, you realize this: the Victorians, for all their oddities, understood that sleep wasn't just about silence, it was about meaning, a message behind the veil, a whisper in the dark. Let the dream begin. You turn now into a subtler, sadder hallway of the Victorian night, the quiet spaces where grief settled like dust and refused to lift. Because sometimes it wasn't a weak nerve or a heavy meal keeping you awake. Sometimes it was loss. And for the Victorians, mourning and insomnia were intimately linked. Victorian society had elaborate rituals for grief. Black veils, formal letters of condolence, entire wardrobes of mourning clothes, but little guidance for what to do when night fell and the mind refused to still. If you'd lost someone, you didn't just miss them during the day, you listened for their breath at night. And when you realized they were gone, truly gone, staying in sleep could become the enemy, or worse, a betrayal. A mainstream historical fact: Queen Victoria herself suffered long chronic insomnia after the death of Prince Albert. She often wrote letters at midnight, paced palace corridors, and even had his dressing things left exactly as he'd last used them for over 40 years. She became the most public symbol of private sleepless mourning. Grief literature of the time advised mourners to accept sleeplessness as part of the process. A holy suffering, they called it. Sleep, if it came at all, was often described as shallow or haunted. In personal letters, people confided that they feared sleep because it brought dreams of the lost, painful, lifelike illusions that dissolved by morning, leaving them twice broken. And yet, historians still argue whether these night watches of grief were themselves a kind of healing. Some letters suggest that people cherished those nighttime hours, uninterrupted, hushed, and honest. That sleeplessness made room for reflection or even communion with the memory of the departed. One deeply quirky Victorian belief that mirrors should be covered during mourning so the dead wouldn't see themselves and become confused. Some also thought that uncovered mirrors could trap spirits or reflect their absence too clearly. You lie in your imaginary room now, with all the mirrors draped in black lace, and the only visible thing is candlelight and maybe the soft outline of someone no longer there. It wasn't uncommon to keep a small locket or a lock of hair beneath one's pillow, something tangible to clutch during the long hours of wakefulness. In some homes, a chair was left empty by the bed just in case the lost might visit in dream or presence. Not out of superstition necessarily, but out of need. Those unable to sleep from grief often turned to poetry or scripture. Tennyson's In Memoriam became something of a companion for the grieving, its long melancholic verses matching the slow ticking of sleepless hours. Others wrote their own poetry, wept quietly into handkerchiefs, or simply stared at the ceiling and listened to the house creak. In mourning with them, there's a weight to grief insomnia that doesn't ask for cure, only for acknowledgement. And that's something the Victorians, in their black crepe and candlelit vigils, understood deeply. They didn't expect sleep to save them, they just hoped it would arrive eventually, carrying a little mercy with it. You breathe a little slower now, not out of sadness, but in recognition. Because sometimes the heaviest things keep us up, not because they're loud, but because they're sacred. And sometimes being awake in the dark is the most human thing in the world. You turn the corner again, softer now, into a room filled not with sadness or ceremony, but with sounds, strange sounds, soothing sounds, and sometimes no sound at all. Welcome to the Victorian experience of night noise, where every creak, whistle, and sigh of the house became part of the lullaby, or the reason you couldn't sleep. Victorian homes, especially in the cities, were not particularly quiet places. Between rattling pipes, the hiss of gas lamps, the distant clop of horses on cobblestone, and the ever-present threat of mice in the walls, the nighttime was rarely silent. You lie back in your four-poster bed and notice how the world continues to murmur. The wind moans softly through the chimney, a loose shutter knocks, and somewhere someone's snoring through paper-thin walls. Mainstream fact: London in the mid-1800s had over 1,000 night soil collectors, chimney sweeps and lamplighters, people whose work began just as others tried to sleep. If you lived in a boarding house or near the river, chances are your lullaby included footsteps, laughter, and the occasional drunken argument drifting in from the street. But not all night sounds were intrusive. Some Victorians deliberately cultivated soothing audio environments. Gentle music boxes were popular, especially the kind that played waltzes or arias in delicate winding loops. Some people even slept with small chimes in the room, believing their subtle ringing encouraged peace. And of course, there was the classic, a ticking pocket watch placed just close enough to the ear to lull you into rhythmic surrender. A fringe favorite, Aeolian harps. These instruments, strung across windows or eaves, played music using only the wind. As the breeze moved through the strings, eerie, delicate tones would float through the room. To some, it was magical. To others, ghostly. Historians still argue whether Aeolian harps were more popular among romantics or spiritualists. Either way, they were a sleep soundtrack unlike any other. Silence, ironically, was harder to come by. In the countryside, nights were quieter, but not silent. Owls, foxes, the occasional church bell marking the hour. And then there were the internal sounds, your own heartbeat, your breath, the rustle of your blanket. For some Victorians, these became too loud in the absence of real noise. So they'd open a window just a crack to let the outside world in. A breeze, a cat's yowl, a bit of distant life to keep them company. And speaking of windows, here's a quirky bit. Some homes were built with night ventilation flaps, tiny hinged panels near the top of windows meant to let in fresh air during the night. People believe a current of air improved both health and sleep. Though in the winter, this meant you could hear the wind and feel it, too romantic in theory, freezing in practice. Urban noise wasn't just tolerated, it became part of the background. In fact, by the 1890s, some Londoners began complaining when things got too quiet. The absence of clatter meant something was wrong. Maybe the milkman hadn't come, or worse, the city had gone to sleep without you. You picture yourself now lying in bed, a little cold, the blanket tucked up to your chin. Outside, the world hums faintly. Maybe you hear a foghorn or a neighbor walking home late. Maybe the only sound is your own yawn stretching out into the hush. Either way, the noises have become familiar, like a bedtime story told in rhythm and echo. The Victorians may not have had Spotify sleep playlists or white noise machines, but they had the raw, living soundtrack of a world still busy in the dark. And whether they found it annoying or comforting, it meant one thing above all: they were not alone. The air grows cooler now as we inch closer to the last few hours before dawn, a time the Victorians called the dead of night. Though, ironically, It was often the most alive part of the evening for those who couldn't sleep. You've made it this far with them. Through their tonics, dreams, prayers, and noises, now comes a quieter form of surrender resignation, and with it creativity. Because when sleep wouldn't come, many Victorians did something oddly productive. They made things, not loudly or with great fanfare, but quietly, persistently, in the hush of their lamplit bedrooms or drawing rooms. These were the midnight crafters, writers, and thinkers. People who, like you, found themselves suspended in the night and decided to pass the time with purpose. Mainstream fact: Charles Dickens was famously insomniac and often took long nighttime walks through London, sometimes up to 20 miles at a time, returning just before sunrise to write. His late-night wanderings gave birth to vivid city scenes in his books. He wasn't alone. Many artists, thinkers, and diarists of the era admitted to doing their best work at 2 a.m. Some sewed, some painted, others journaled or worked out mathematical puzzles by candlelight. And then there were the letter writers, people who used those restless hours to pen long, rambling missives to friends, lovers, or estranged cousins. These night letters were often more confessional, poetic, or strangely philosophical than anything written during the day. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal bursts of creativity were a result of insomnia or a way to avoid it. Did the activity create the wakefulness, or did the wakefulness demand an outlet? Maybe both. What's clear is that many Victorians eventually stopped fighting the night and began to dance with it instead. A quirky tidbit for you: some Victorian households even had designated night desks with soft ink pens and noiseless drawers for those who needed to write without waking others. You can imagine it now, a small, dedicated space, candlelight flickering the scratch of a nib against paper as thoughts pour out like slow water. There were books written entirely during the sleepless hours. Emily Bronte, too anxious to sleep at times, would sit at her window and write poems while the wind howled across the moors. Others, like Florence Nightingale, used insomnia for planning writing, reflecting she often called those hours her true solitude. Even ordinary people, not famous or poetic, found purpose in sleeplessness. There are journals from servants who embroidered lace at night, or made lists of grocery needs, or drafted imaginary conversations with their betters. And widows tucked in oversized saunamas beds wrote bedtime stories never meant to be published, just read aloud to no one. In a society obsessed with productivity, being awake when others slept became an unexpected kind of power, a stillness that allowed for self-expression without interruption or scrutiny. Night wasn't just absence, it was permission. And so you settle deeper now, the blanket a little heavier, the room softer. You picture yourself with a quill in hand or a bit of embroidery in your lap, doing something slow, something real, something yours. Not to impress, not even to finish, just to be present in the lull of it all. The Victorians knew that sometimes the best way through sleeplessness was not to resist it, but to repurpose it. Not to conquer the night, but to join it. The edges of the night are fraying now, and the sky, if you looked, would be softening, turning from ink to charcoal, the final Victorian hour before dawn. This is when even the most stubborn insomniacs begin to quiet, not from sleep, but from fatigue. It's a sacred, blurry space, a kind of surrender. For those still awake, this hour held strange comfort. You weren't alone anymore. Birds stirred, milk carts rolled, a house creaked differently, like it was stretching. And in that gentle, ghostly pause between darkness and day, the Victorians found their own secret kind of peace. Mainstream fact: it was common for people in the 1800s to wake naturally between what they called first sleep and second sleep. This twilight hour, often between 2 and 5 a.m., was used for prayer reading, even intimacy. Many simply accepted it. Sleep wasn't one long block, but a pair of restful acts separated by calm wakefulness. By now you've shared their night, their rituals, their fears, their odd and lovely comforts. You've wandered their corridors both in mansions and tenements, met their anxieties over clocks and ghosts and dreams, and now you arrive with them here at the quietest part of all. Historians still argue whether this segmented sleep model was truly natural or simply a byproduct of oil lamp economics and the absence of Netflix. But regardless of the cause, the effects remain poetic: time to think, time to be, a thin window where the soul could breathe. And the Victorians breathed in all kinds of ways. A quirky detail: some people used this early morning hour to rehearse the day's conversations, especially those prone to shyness or performance. They'd stand in their nightclothes and mutter greetings or rebuttals to a darkened room, and in a strange way it worked. They entered the daylight rehearsed, prepared. Others found comfort in the first sounds of their household, waking the soft clatter of the kitchen fire being lit, the dog stirring the muffled voice of a milkmaid humming to herself as she passed beneath the window. These weren't disruptions. They were reassurances, signs that the world hadn't vanished while you lay there wondering. For many, sleep didn't come at all. But still, they'd rise, dress slowly, and begin the day. There's a unique bravery in that kind of fatigue, the kind where your body feels hollow and yet you step forward into morning anyway. And now, in this final hush, you realize something gentle and enduring. The night was never your enemy, nor was sleep your prize. The point was the passage, the company, the flicker of candlelight, the scratch of pen on paper, the sound of distant horses in the street, and the knowledge that someone somewhere was also awake. So you rest now, not because the night demands it, but because you've seen it through. And if sleep finds you in the next moment or the next hour, it's not a surrender. It's a soft, slow bow to a night well lived. And now the candles have burned low, the last tea has gone cold, and the night, like an old storyteller, begins to close its eyes. You've made your way gently through rooms of ritual dreams and drowsy invention. Each shadowy hallway led not to fear but to understanding. Each sleepless soul you met reminded you that rest is not always measured in hours. So take a deeper breath now. Let your limbs go heavier. Your chest rises slowly, then falls. Your thoughts no longer need to solve or wonder or reach. They can soften. They can float. Whatever held you in the bright rush of the day no longer needs to be held. It can sit beside you now, calmly, quietly, without urgency. You are not late. You are not behind. You are simply here, and that is more than enough. Let the rhythm slow. Let the air around you feel like water, cool, weightless, and kind. The world has not ended. It is only sleeping, and soon you will be too. Maybe you dream of a candle flickering in a tall window, maybe of footsteps fading down a long hall, or maybe nothing at all, just darkness, soft and sweet, with no edges, no sound, and no hurry. The Victorians are tucked in, now every last one, and so, at last, are you.